Hey, what's going on everybody? Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker here, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we're constantly and always still learning. Today we're going to be reviewing and taking a look at the Godox flexible LED mats. Now, I've somehow missed this because I had no idea they actually had it, so I want to thank Godox for sending this out to me so I can provide you with this review today. Now the TLDR here is, in terms of what you need to know, is that these lights are quite powerful and their output is somewhere around a 100 watt equivalent in terms of a cob LED. This is bicolor, so 100 watts to the tungsten, 100 watts to the daylight. You can use batteries, and in my battery test, I got about an hour with my 195 watt hour battery. They do come in various sizes. The largest ones that I do have is a 2x2 and a 2x1, and they do have a softbox and grid accessory that does cost additional to the overall package. There's no fan inside, so it's completely silent, which is awesome. The length of the cord is fine for general panel setups for like interviews, but if you're trying to get creative with your panel setup, it's not going to be long enough. Luckily, I was able to find a relatively cheap 4-pin XLR with 4 conductors that was able to extend the length of the cable by an additional 10 feet. Links to that specific cable is below, as not all 4-pin XLRs on Amazon have true 4-pin connectors inside. So at the end of the day, do I recommend these Godox LED mats? I do recommend it if you're looking for a flexible LED light, but whether or not it should be your very first light, no, I think a cob LED should be your very first light. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the bottom line. So without further ado, let's actually go to the test results and see how well it performs. Looking at the bare LED from 6 feet away, we are getting some solid numbers here. There is plenty of output from both tungsten and daylight for you to shoot through some modifiers to soften up the light when you're filming indoors. Next up, we take a look at the softbox accessory, again from 6 feet away, and we are still seeing some great results. With the softbox, we are seeing the equivalent of a bare Godox SL60W with no modifiers at all. Knowing these panels can blast out that equivalent with its softbox on is great, as it continues to give you even more wiggle room if you want to double diffuse it to get even softer light. Lastly, when you attach the grid to the mix from 6 feet away, we are seeing the equivalent numbers of basically a Neewer 660 panel, which is actually a lensed focused LED around 20 watts. So if you want to kind of give a cob LED equivalent, we're looking at about a 40 watt equivalent. Here's a quick look at all the numbers together so it's easier for you guys to compare. The orange column is for tungsten and the blue is for daylight. And as always, if you want to see how these lights compare to other lights I've reviewed on this channel, then definitely check out TLDRFILMmaker.com. Now let's take a look at the color checker test. As always, I am dialing in the Kelvin on my GH5 and not actually doing a custom white balance to do this test. Now the tungsten is doing quite well, and it's giving exact typical Panasonic color science, where the skin tones and the reds are typically going to go towards yellow. Daylight is giving a great reading with all the chips pointing to their respective areas. For my last test, I wanted to see just how good the softbox accessory is. Starting off with the square LED mat, we see that the softbox does soften the shadows a little bit. The shadow under my chin is not as contrasty as the bare LED. The grid, of course, is going to focus that soft light forward and does a decent job in doing so. Now looking at the 1x3 strip light in the vertical orientation, the softbox does continue to soften the very far side of my face. The grid again does a much better job in this type of orientation, as you are able to keep the soft light from hitting the wall right behind me. Now, if we take the 1x3 and set it horizontally, this is where we can get the best light wraparound and giving the illusion of a very soft light. It's a little harder to see, but the softbox does help eliminate the hot spots that will generally show up on your forehead or cheeks. The grid again helps keep the light from splashing too much on the wall behind me. Lastly, if we take a look at all 3 of the softbox options together in their various orientations, the horizontal is easily the softest. The square panel comes in second in terms of keeping things a little bit more natural looking, and the vertical orientation on the strip light will do the best in terms of lighting up your entire body versus the other 2 orientations and panel basically only primarily lighting up your face. So what's the bottom line here? Do I recommend this Godox flexible LED mat? And I do. It comes in cheaper than the competition. It's got some really good sizes that can fit pretty much any type of use case. And when it comes down to it, it beats out the ultra budget flexible LED lights, in which those are not necessarily flexible on a cloth. those are basically on their own aluminum sheet or something like that. You can literally hear it crinkling around as you are folding it, which is probably not good for the duration and life expectancy of that LED light. The Godox does a great job. Now, when it comes to the other companies that are technically more budget than something like the Wescott brand, the Falconeyes and IntelliTech, they are more expensive. If you're trying to do a 2x2 or 2x1, in which case I would say you might as well save the cash because the Godox is going to more or less give you exactly what you need. But where the Falconeyes and IntelliTech actually do better is that they offer more options and more sizes, significantly bigger sizes. And in their case, they also offer RGB-W versions, whereas Godox is only bicolor. And then, of course, you have Amran's new entry with their flexible LED mats that is an RGB-WW type of light. And for the smaller size, it actually does quite well in terms of blasting nearly the same amount of light. So that's going to be their own thing. We'll see if they have bigger options down in the future. But when it comes down to it, the Godox is a really good budget light if you need something like this where it's lightweight, easy to take with you. Does take a little bit to set up, but that's kind of the trade-off for having the flexibility. But the trade-off is great because of your ability to literally stick it onto flat surfaces and hide it within a scene. Now, the cable isn't very long, but you can get yourself some XLR extension cables, and that will allow you to have the control box much further away. And therefore, if you're running a huge long line from the ceiling to somewhere else to get it out of the scene, you can do it that way. Now, in terms of should this be your first LED light if you are looking for one, I would say no. You definitely want to get a cob LED, which Godox has quite a few. One of my favorite ones is the ML60 brand for how small it is and how powerful it is. But the reason you want those lights, it's because you have the ability to modify it in many different ways. You can either keep it as a floodlight, you can spot it down, you can keep it as a hard light, or you can soften it. And you can also cut the light with other different additional modifiers, whereas with a flexible LED, you really don't have that option. You either can leave it as a flood beam, you can try to cut it down with some big flags, but then you might get the multi-shadow, which you most likely will, so then you're gonna have to diffuse the light with something just to kind of get it cut down. And when you think of it that way, that setup is very, very large versus a cob LED light, which is just one attachment away from giving you those options. So I would say these flexible lights from Godox is a really good auxiliary companion to their cob LED lights. It's that light to get you a little fill coming from somewhere else. It's that light where if you want some hair light or some top-down lighting, you can literally just boom it over someone's head and you don't have to worry about weighing it down with a huge sandbag to get it to stay in place and potentially hit your actor or fall onto your actor. Or in the more extreme cases is, again, you can just gaff tape it to something and it will hold because it's so light and it's really not going to pull the tape down. So at the end of the day, the Godox flexible light, I do recommend it, and it's a great auxiliary light to your already existing kit. And hey, that is it for this week, everybody. If this video has made all the influence in your purchasing decisions, I do have some affiliate links down below. Again, it costs nothing extra to you, but it does help support the channel should you decide to use it. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave it down below. I will get to them as fast as I can. And until then, like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time.